This is a game of how I engineered a stalemate. Now, disclaimer, this does not work all the time, but every now and then you might find a way in which you can engineer a stalemate. I mean, I would rather that as opposed losing a whole game. Now, like I say, it doesn't happen all the time, and it's quite not easy to engineer a stalemate, but I actually engineered one in this game, and I want to show you exactly how I did that. Now, disclaimer, I was losing the game at this point, but what I want to say is there is something that happens a lot on chess.com, whereby as soon as people feel that they have lost the game or have thrown the game, then they just typically resign or abort or abandon the game. And when that happens, I really get discouraged when people actually do that. I, since starting playing on chess.com, have never aborted a game or resigned or abandoned and so on. I just continue playing the game up until the end. And when I once saw myself succeeding in actually engineering a stalemate. And by the way, this wasn't intentional, but for some reason, I actually saw a little pocket within the game where I could see that, hold on, this game could end in a stalemate. Now, as I say, sometimes it might work, sometimes it might not work, but I just really want to use this video to say, hey, look, if you are in a situation where you've actually lost the game, see if this is something that could work for you. And I think you're going to find this very interesting because instead of, me losing the game, I eventually got the game to like a stalemate. And of course, I didn't lose the game. And obviously, both of you get like half a point, half a point. And at least your elo still stays intact. So try to play the game all the way to the end and see if you can kind of engineer like a stalemate, exactly like how I did. And I'll show you the whole game, how things obviously built up until that point. Sorry, I've rambled longer than I intended to do so at the beginning and the opening of this video, but this is something that possibly could work for you or work for anyone, for that matter. But it kind of works in certain situations, and I'll speak about that as soon as we get to that point. So yeah, let's have a look and see how everything developed in the game. So as usual, I'm white and the opponent is black. So they play d4, which is a book move, many good opening starts this way, no matter how your opponent responds. And they then play d5, which is also a book move, a standard response to d4 that battles for the center and opens up their light squared bishop, as we can see right over here. And I then obviously move my knight to c3, again, another book move, developing my knight and pressuring the pawn and controlling the e4 square. So they respond with knight f6, which is also another book move. And we're just developing our pieces at this stage. Nothing really major happening. And in turn, they're also defending their pawn, which is a solid move. So I respond with knight f3, another last book move. And I'm essentially bringing my knight into play here, eyeing these central squares, as you can see pointed by these arrows here. And at this point, we essentially have mimicked each other. They've got their knight, I've got my knight, pawn, pawn, knight, knight, and we've got this nice sort of square here, and every single one of us trying to get control of the center. So this is how the game has started, at least at the beginning, and shortly we'll be moving into the middle of the game, and that's where things start to get a bit more interesting, so to speak. So from here, I then move my pawn to e3, which is an excellent move. And this kind of prepares my bishop for development to this diagonal right over here. And my opponent also then responds. Let's just quickly go back here. And my opponent then responds with bishop f5. Again, an excellent move. And they just essentially bringing their bishop, increasing their control over the center. Excellent. Bishop to d3. This is offering my opponent the opportunity to exchange pieces, and these are obviously pieces worth equal value, and this is a bishop for a bishop. Now, I typically do not like to exchange pieces of the same value. To me, it doesn't really add any value to my game. And I think I've proven that to myself many, many times over. In fact, I'd rather exchange a knight for a bishop. I find bishops to be more valuable as opposed to knights. Now, even though they do have the same number of points, I believe 3 points each, that's fine. But in the long run, I prefer having a bishop towards the middle of the game and towards the end of the game. And this has been proven by many, many computer, computer, chess machines. They've proven that having a bishop is actually way more valuable as opposed to having a knight. And ideally, the reason is because bishops have a long range reach within the chess or within chess. They can move from, one end of the board all the way to the other end of the board and vice versa, as opposed to a knight, which in most cases obviously has to be positioned in a way that allows you to capitalize on whatever's happening within the match at the time. So I prefer rather exchanging my knight for my opponent's bishop as opposed to exchanging a bishop for bishop. It doesn't really help my game. At least that's what I think and that's what I believe. And I have seen that play to my favor in the long run as the game continues to develop. But anyway, so my opponent, instead of exchanging pieces, decides to rather defend their bishop, which is good, even though I believe that if I were to, say, develop my knight to, say, this file right over here, which is knight h4, this then would kind of force them to exchange or take my bishop, and then I'd need to retaliate. Because doing this allows me to then, take their bishop, and they might obviously need to, retaliate with the queen, which obviously is not something they're going to do because then they just lose a queen for free, which obviously not the good or the best of plays. Anyway, this is where we are at this point. So I castle, and they then move their a pawn forward, which is the king's pawn to a6, which is an excellent move. This kind of also clears way to bring their dark squared bishop into the game. And the nice thing also at this point is the fact that instead of having the bishop defended by the queen, they've now got the bishop defended by the pawn, which is excellent. At least now they have more material to change in exchange for my bishop and whatever other piece I choose to move forward to try and attack this bishop. It obviously wasn't a good move to have a queen defend a bishop, especially at the very early parts of the game. But anyway, the match continues. So this for me was an interesting move where I played my rook to e1 because essentially I'm trying to align my rook for a future sort of battle, so to speak. Because if they were to bring their queen into this position right over here, then I've got my bishop in line to attack the queen and essentially just pin the queen to the king. Now, obviously, there are a couple of things which need to happen here. For one, I need to get my pawn out of the way. They need to get their pawn out of the way. And, there's going to be a battle, obviously, of maybe knights coming into, a position here or whatever the case is. And obviously, I'd need to make plans to try and clear this line. So I pin the queen to the king. A far-fetched idea, and nothing of that sort happened within this game. But again, I think it's always good to really position yourself because this, in a way, is still the beginning of the game. We're not really at a point where things are heated up. But it is a good move, and at least it positions myself to be ready to make my attacks when the time is right. So, with that said, they then move their bishop to e7. Again, this is good, preparing for a castle kingside and securing their king, which is good. Again, it also then just does away with whatever ideas I might have for this e-file. So, I then bring my knight into play here, which is knight e5. Now, this, what you see here, is something that is called the Pillsbury Knight. And essentially, the Pillsbury Knight is an attacking move. It's actually a famous chess attacking setup pioneered by the strong American master Harry Nelson Pillsbury. And it usually happens in the Queen's Gambit. And the main idea here, all right, is to plant an early powerful knight on the e5 square supported by the pawn, as you can see right over here. And ideally, it's really just to put some pressure on the king side here, because like I mentioned a few seconds ago, the king is about to, make or castle rather, castle king side. And because of that, this then kind of positions this knight to start putting more pressure on the king side right over here or here, and so on and so forth. But of course, there's also this right over here, which I'm eyeing. But of course, this is again, defended by this knight right over here. So it might not, work out as need be. But again, this is the Pillsbury knight, and it usually happens when I've got my knight, the white knight rather, on the e5 square, supported by a pawn on d4, and it's called the Pillsbury knight. Now, in chess, you'll come across many of these terms. I kind of like just rattling off these terms. They're kind of interesting to me. The Indian move, or the Indian defense, and the Italian and the Corocan and this and that. There's just so many terms which you'll find in chess, and if you love the game as much as I do, I think you'll come to appreciate and enjoy all these terms which you'll find within chess. But anyway, the game continues. So they take my knight on e5, and I also obviously respond with capturing their knight. So this is like an equal trade, which is fine. I'm not really particular about knights, even though I do believe that they are one of the most subliminal pieces you'll ever come across. They just pop up from everywhere and anywhere. And before you know it, you've got them in these sort of weird positions. And sometimes they're so difficult to predict and figure out. But I love the knights. I mean, my whole channel is called KniightShiift because I really love the this piece. Maybe it should have been called Bishop Shift, but that didn't really rhyme very nicely with me. So I kind of like Knight Shift. It also has this sort of, this sort of, idea to it, about the knights, and the only really the real piece, which is sort of humane, because it has like eyes, it lives. Anyway, so the game continues, and they then move their knight to g4. And according to the computer, this is a mistake, and it's kind of inaccurate. But the computer really wants me to, take this piece now that they've moved their knight to g4. But instead, I try to kick up their knight. And apparently, this is also a risky move, because it leaves my king open to potential attacks, especially coming, from this far right over here. They move their knight to back to e5, and I then advance my pawn to e4, and they take. I take with the knight, and they exchange, and I take with the bishop at this point. And I think I did not want to expose my queen. I don't think I wanted to have an exchange by taking my, piece over here, or rather taking my, bishop, and exchanging that, for the piece that was here, which was the bishop. And obviously that would have created problems for me because I do not have anything else protecting my queen, particularly with this move which I played here, which is moving my rook and obviously exchanging their bishop for that. So they move out of the way, and I advance my a4 pawn forward, and they then castle king side, which is good, protecting their king, which is also a good thing. And now I start to develop my bishops, and again, trying to position them in a way that makes sense so that if an opportunity does arise, I am ready to take advantage of that. So they bring the rook to the center of the board as well, behind the queen, and I get a free pawn, okay? And the pawn was, mine for the taking, so why not? I just take the pawn. Now, at this stage, I also want to make sure that I bring my bishop back because something happened in the game that I wasn't particularly fond of, but that's how, obviously, everything, well, at least up until this point, this is how everything is. So they kick out my rook, and I've now got a bishop which potentially will hang, and I've got this rook that I need to take care of. So I move out of the way. And again, as you can see, according to the computer, this is a blunder, which to me doesn't make sense. Am I supposed to leave my rook here and be, taken for a pawn? Of course not. But now here's the thing. They then advance forward, and I move my bishop out of the way, attacking their queen, and queen take, and they take my rook. Now, it is at this point where I saw that this wasn't a fair exchange. I actually lost a rook in exchange for my queen. I mean, you saw what happened there, and I'm not in a good position at this point. And for some reason, that realization kicked in, and I still have a bishop right over here, which obviously I can't bring here. I can't bring this bishop here, and potentially this is where I can bring, well, not even here, because again they've got this rook which is in my way. But now I'm in check and I need to take care of my king, so I move the king out of the way, and now they've blocked my bishop over here, and this is not looking good for me. So now I'm trying to salvage this piece. And according to the computer, a better move would be for me to try and kick out this piece right over here, which is the knight. And that is not what happened, because I'm trying to salvage this piece over here. But you'll see in a moment why this is a good move, g3. So let's have a look. So I move my rook to c3, and they have bishop d6, and I try to come back because now I cannot do anything. This is protected, this is also protected, and I need to find a different way to try and salvage my bishop, which is just hanging on the left side of the board. And so they start to bring in their king into action in f7. And according to the computer, again, this is not an accurate way to move about. They obviously they missed a chance to win material by revealing a check and attacking a piece at the same time. And yeah, apparently that's actually how the computer sees everything. So now I start moving my pawn into g3, which is something I should have done earlier. But again, my concern was this bishop, which literally was hanging. So anyway, they move out their knight, and I advance to c6 with my bishop. Now I have my pawns which are under attack here, and not a good move for me. And at this point, my chances of winning the game are quite slim. And I think it is at this point where I started thinking maybe I could engineer a stalemate if it comes to that. Bishop to d7, and rook takes a pawn on f2. I move out of the way. They take my other pawn. I try to advance, trying to create similar threats on their side of the board. And they just essentially move their piece out of the way. So, and put me into check. Okay, so a bishop c5 and check. Move my king out of the way. Now they're attacking my bishop, and there really isn't a good way to defend this bishop. No matter where I move, I'm in trouble. This bishop is about to be, in a way lost. And the only option I have is really to move the bishop out of the way. But it does me no good to move my bishop, in any active square, because again, I've got this which is under attack by the king. So again, not looking good for me. So I have a choice, okay? I essentially have a choice, and the choice which I chose is fine. I lose my rook, or rather, sorry, lose my bishop. But then again, I'm unable to get that back because if I take here, after they've taken, my bishop, I take, they take. So it really is a losing position for me. And again, I've still got this under fire. So let's resume. So with that, I take the knight. Again, doesn't help me at this point. They exchange. I take their pawn, doesn't help. They take that. And this is the point where I'm now starting to think, okay, there's one thing which I understand towards the end of the game, and that is the fact that if you've got pawns which are just hanging all over the board, and they have such pieces like your bishop and two rooks, I mean, it just makes sense to start attacking these pieces. And I know for a fact that they were either going to move this side to try and attack this piece, or they were going to move this side to try and attack this piece. And I started thinking, well, where can I start to move so I can at least try to engineer a stalemate? And I knew that it had to be somewhere in the middle of the board. And that's what I started doing. I started advancing towards the middle of the board. So I first pushed my pawn out, take, take, and they start, piling up their rooks and connecting their rooks, which is always a good thing to do. And I think at this point, they really just wanted to put me into a checkmate position, and that would be the end of the game. So obviously, I had other ideas in mind. So I move my king to the center of the board, check, and I move away. They take my piece, and to b2, I advance my king to f4, check. I advance my king to e5, and they take my piece, and I move forward because I still had a move which I had to play, and it wasn't really a forced a checkmate at this point. And so they move their pawn forward, and it becomes a stalemate. So b5, which is the move of the pawn, was my luck. So lucky me. Now, even though my opponent was winning, they ended up still mating me, letting me escape with a draw. And that is what happened, ladies and gentlemen. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, if at all possible, try to engineer a stalemate instead of giving up in the game. Now, the one distinction which I made in this game was the fact that I had to be in the middle of the board, still mating myself and putting me in a position where I cannot move any further. And of course, as we know, you cannot move into a check position. And all around my king, as you can see, all the red squares or all the highlighted red squares just show that I cannot move any further from where I was. So yeah, I engineered a stalemate. And I got 1 point, or half a point rather. So did my opponent. And another distinction which I made is that this kind of works when your opponent has many pieces still left on the board. And if that is the case, that means they have many pieces pointing in many different directions. And most of those directions are squares which you cannot move into. And in that way, you kind of cocoon yourself in a way that puts you in this position. And it's a stalemate. And it was a stalemate with 4 minutes left on their clock and 55 seconds left on my clock. So the b5 pawn move was a not so good move on their side. And I'm sure at this point they were like, shucks, they haven't won the game. And this is a game that they should have won. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, as I said on my previous video, is that I wanted to show this to you because if anyone happens to watch these games, or this one in particular, it's not easy. It's always not really deducive to know where to move and where you can put yourself in a position, because every single move changes the dimension of the board, changes what's available and what isn't available. In my case, this was a lucky move. And even though I had it at the back of my mind that I want to engineer this, it worked. So yeah, don't throw games. Try to play all your games through and try, if you can, to engineer a stalemate. But I get it. Some people just don't want to play up until this point, and they just want to, move forward, play games which they might potentially win, and therefore they might not really be in the mood to play all the way up until this point. So that is it, ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to bringing you more videos on this KniightShiift channel. And with that said, thank you very much for tuning in up until this point. If you enjoyed this video, well, you know what to do. If you have anything you'd like to share, well, you've got the comment section to do that. And again, feel free to like this video if you wish. And for the rest of you, I will definitely catch you in the next video. Up until then, take awesome care.